Welcome to the webinar Nature-Based Solution in Coastal Systems. The webinar is organized within the framework of the Exit Swindon project with the technical support of the Instituto de Ingeniería of UNAM. Special thanks to Amalia, Fernanda, and Luis. Now a few words from the technical coordinator of the Exit Swindon project.
Welcome to the Latin American webinar on nature-based solutions in coastal systems, and also welcome to the Exit Swindon Worldwide Network on Sustainable Water Management in Developing Countries. Who we are. We are a global network consisting of 51 universities and research institutions in 16 countries, spread over 4 continents. The regional centers are located in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. The cooperation in research and teaching is mainly related to problems that are defined in the Sustainable Development Goals 6, 11, and 13. The focus is particularly on research topics dealing with water in coastal areas, water pollution, water quality, waste and wastewater treatment, water scarcity, sustainable water management, and water governance. The network has expert groups that deal with transfer measures within the framework of the Science Policy Dialogue, for example, with research approaches that are practice-oriented. The solutions are developed in dialogue with authorities and government programs to improve water supply and sanitation, waste management, and coastal protection. The challenges are huge, and in the face of climate change and a steadily growing world population, it seems almost impossible to come up with satisfactory and sustainable solutions. However, giving up is not an option either, even though the measures are reactive rather than preventive in nature. The changes in the broad area of water issues are so rapid that it is hardly possible to find solution in time, and we can only react as best as possible. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very good and fruitful seminar. Thank you very much.
Well, today we will have 5 speakers. At the end, we will try to answer your questions and comment. Please, you can write all your comments in the chat, and at the end of the session, we will spend time in this activity. Well, one of the things that I would like to remark is that all the speakers have been participating in different activities of the Exit Swindon project. Most of them were involved in the last summer school 3 years ago that was held in Puerto Morelos, Mexico. We will start now in order to save the time with the first speaker, and it's an honor to give the floor to our first speaker, Doctora Deborah Litwood, who works at INECOL Mexico. Please, Deborah.
Thank you very much to Exit and to you for the kind invitation. I'm really glad to be here. And let's start. I'm really sorry I have to turn off the camera because my internet is not working really good. But I think that today it will be really interesting because we will talk about coastal ecosystems that, in my point of view, are cornerstones for socioeconomic recovery, at least in developing countries. So please, the next slide. First, we will talk about the main coastal ecosystems, because I know that we have the honor of a broad audience, and then talk about which services they provide, as well as the threats, including the really funny term that I like, that is coastal squeeze. Well, I like the term, but not the consequences. And of course, then we will talk about which are the effects of loss of ecosystem services, in special on human well-being. And why I think, and a lot of people think, that to invest in ecosystem services recovery, especially coastal ecosystems, is a really good idea. And then some examples, and I will end with talking a little bit about the Decade of Restoration, which I think that is a great initiative and project. The next one, please. Well, first of all, a coastal ecosystem is an area where land and water come together. And it's really important. They're really important because coastal ecosystems provide habitat for a wide diversity of plants and animals, as well as resources and homes to humans around the world. Examples of coastal ecosystems include coastal reefs, mangroves, seagrasses, among others. Let's see some pictures, just in case that in your countries you don't have some of them. We don't have some of them also. The next slide, please. For example, one really, really famous coastal ecosystem are coral reefs. The next one, please. This is my really, really gorgeous ecosystems, which are coastal dunes. And as you can see in this picture, they can have vegetation like shrubs and little vines, but also they can have trees and even forests, as in Veracruz, in the Gulf of Mexico, dunes rocks. Also, we have mangroves, which are the rock stars of coastal ecosystems and, of course, of the wetlands. But we have to talk about all the other coastal ecosystems that also provides really important ecosystem services. The next one, please. Another wetland which is really important are swamps. The next. And even freshwater wetlands. And of course that we would like to have a healthy and robust coastal ecosystems and marine ecosystems, because they provide the underpinning for profitable industries and support coastal communities throughout the world. In addition, it's talking about in this the ocean decade that the ocean plays a crucial role in regulating the atmosphere and modulating weather, storing carbon, cycling nutrients, and providing other ecosystem services. But we cannot forget that also coastal ecosystems that are more close to the land are also important, because they provide essential resources. They buffer land from storms and provide living space for almost half of the global population. Yet today, many of these ecosystems and their services that they provide are under threat. The next one, please. Just in case you are not so familiar with the term ecosystem services, well, the problem is that we are been changing this term in the at least in the last 20 years. But in general, ecosystem services have been defined in different ways over the years. With the term, the most common definition are the benefits people obtain from ecosystem services, and this definition it is very strong and really famous since the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was like 2 decades ago. But decade ago, Pochin and Hines proposed some changes just to clarify that these services are really related with the ecosystems, and which are the benefits that people get from the function of the ecosystems, which benefits inside the socioeconomic systems. And in this decade, based on the previous definition, Culhane in the last year defined exchange, protection, and the cultural amenity, which is the much evident, but also one of the most difficult to evaluate, with such as inspiration for culture, art, and design. The next, please. As you can imagine, hundreds of millions of people worldwide depend on coastal ecosystems. Let's see an example with coral reefs that the study depended on, and his or her collaborators. And they identify where people are at risk and where more science is needed. And for that, Pendleton et al. Mapped ecological, social, and physical factors to understand how depends on coral reef ecosystems will be affected by what? By global-driven threats, especially related with climate change. And really interesting that he found that the Western Mexico, Micronesia, Indonesia, and some parts of Australia had a high human dependence and will likely face severe combined threats. So we can see the urgency of restore and change our trends. And this is important not just in developing countries such as Mexico, also it's important for developed countries such as Australia. The next one, please. And what is happening? Well, as you all know, well, the problem is increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and of course that is causing ocean acidification, and at the same time the sea temperature is being raised, and sometimes the frequency and the intensity of the cyclones and the hurricanes in this world, as we call it, damage the structure of these ecosystems. And when these ecosystems are damaged, they have a direct impact on the fisheries and also on the shore protection. At the same time, the loss of these two services have a direct impact on the livelihood and nutrition, and of course on the property and in the well-being of the people in the community and of the communities in the coastal areas. The next one, please. Well, but it's not just the threats that the coastal ecosystems are facing, like the global threats. They are also facing local threats or more regional threats. For example, the increase on aquaculture, on agriculture near or close to the coastal ecosystems, or the lack of waste treatment, water waste treatment that ends on the sea. Also the coastal squeeze, the increase of industry, and the urban expansion. And what is the problem? Well, that we are putting a lot of pressure on these ecosystems, and of course we are losing habitats, and with that we are losing biodiversity, and we are losing our resilience, and we are increasing our vulnerability to climate change and to sea level rise, and of course of our fragmentation, and with that we are losing or reducing the quality of our ecosystem services. The next, which is a really bad idea if you live like in Mexico, where we receive a lot. You can see, I think that you cannot see Mexico on the map because we have all the trajectory of hurricanes in the last years. The next one. And one of the problems that it's not sometimes focus is that ecosystem services are interrelated and they are connected. Coastal ecosystems are complex mosaics that support people through the ecosystem services, but to provide these ecosystem services, they have to be connected. We have the flow of a species, of energy, of water, and when we interrupt this connectivity, we lost, even if the interruption or even if the impact is not in a single ecosystem service or is just located in one ecosystem service, we can in one coastal ecosystem, sorry, we can lose an ecosystem services that is product of the connectivity of a series of more than one ecosystem. So in this really beautiful scheme figure from the UNEP, you can see that the coral reef, the seagrasses, and the mangroves work together to protect upland. And in countries such as Mexico, that we have beaches and dunes in front of the mangroves, well, these ecosystems also play in this interrelation and in this connectivity that together some are add to the protection of upland. The next one, please. Well, but guess what? Coastal areas are under rapid urbanization. So coastal areas are urbanizing at unprecedented rates, and particularly in low and middle income countries. And the combination of long-standing and emerging problems in these urban areas are generating more vulnerability for human well-being and ecosystems like. But even in this map, where you can see you cannot see Mexico, don't worry. We have a lot of problems. Also, this map was made by Stetzel, from Stetzel and collaborators, and then it identifies 7 different regions where urbanizing is going on the really rapid trend, But also Khalil and Regueiro and other authors also previously in 2017 identified the vulnerability in Latin America. And in Mexico, we have, Khalil and collaborators found that more than 500,000 people live in areas where coastal hazard and exposure and poverty coverage are together. So that creates the conditions for a really disasters. And they also identified hotspots, locations of coastal risk with an index that they propose. And guess what? In Mexico, we have 2 of the 4 hotspots locations that they identify in Latin America, which are in Sinaloa and in Chiapas. The next one, please. The consequences are more evident when we have the hurricane season. Every year we can see stronger or more frequently see hurricanes. And of course, the damages depend on the number of people and the value of the assets and the presence of critical resources in the trajectory of these hurricanes. But also it's determined by the vulnerability of the society and the socio-ecological systems and its exposure. And also, and this is closely related to the poverty or the capacity to adapt and to overcome to this phenomenon. And in 2020, we had 28 storms. From those 14 were hurricanes, and major hurricanes greater than the 3rd category. We had 7 hurricanes. We lost 388 lives, human lives, and a lot of money. And a lot of these casualties can be prevented if we improve our coastal management. The next one, please. One of the problems is that we are increasing our coastal squeeze. But what is coastal squeeze? Well, this phenomenon occurs when there is a chronic loss of coastal habitats landwards, which is associated with long-term processes such as the sea level rise, the Niño, the rigidization of the coast, and the poorly designed coastal defense that are really common in this part of the world. And of course, that this phenomenon may also affect socioeconomic activities such as tourism, not just agriculture or protection services, which are very important. This phenomenon also affects activities such as tourism. For example, in the next slide. We did this small study where we explored the co-occurrence of tourism with coastal squeeze and flooding along the coast of the Mexican Gulf of Mexico, the Mexican part of the Gulf of Mexico, and the Mexican Caribbean. And our results revealed that 30% of the tourist destinations that are really important for our economy are exposed to flooding. And more than 60% of the total coastal study area of this part of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, Mexican Caribbean Sea, had a moderate to severe degree of coastal squeeze. And the problem also is that more than 60% of the hotels are in squeezed beaches, and these hotels, of course, that use the beaches, and the people go to these hotels to go to the beach. So we found that most tourist destinations, especially the ones that from where we obtain a lot of money, and which is really important to our coastal communities, but also to our national economy, is in a high risk of coastal squeeze and flooding. And of course that we have to think different and see which alternatives can we implement to change this trend. And for example, start to think on ecosystem-based protection to overcome this problem. And the next one, please. Well, you can see in this map, I hope that you can see that some, for example, Cancun, which is the most famous tourist destination from Mexico in other countries, it's completely in red, and this is because it's in a really squeezed area, and they are losing their beaches, which is the main asset that they have. Oh, sorry, I forgot that you are. Yes, next, please. And thank you. This is a really problem for us, because you know that it's increasing the trend and the number of the disasters, at least in the least years or in the least last century. And of course, because we are approaching to several global tipping points, and if we don't do something, we will have problems. The next one, please. So we can see that ecosystem services are increasingly endangered by environmental events and processes such as hydrological hazards, floods, and landslide. Climatological hazards also, of course, and also even in coastal areas, effects like droughts and fires. And of course, that this phenomenon affects the ecosystem, the provision of the ecosystem services, and impact is really hard on the human well-being. And even you can imagine that in countries with a lot of mobility, with a lot of people that is moving abroad and is migrating, like in Mexico, the loss of ecosystem services is a great threat. And for example, in this study from the European Union, they saw that some key mobility drivers is that the people facing the detrimental consequences of climate change, and they move because they have to look for more security to meet their basic needs, and thus protect their own lives and of course their family. So if we don't stop this trend, we will have more and more people migrating to other parts of the world where they feel safer. The next one, please. For example, a local case study that I would like to talk about is this one. Is in Marismas Nacionales, is in the Mexican Pacific Ocean. This place is really beautiful. Marismas Nacionales is a large storing complex with more than 200,000 hectares. And Marismas Nacionales, or Manas, as we call it, is the largest wetland in Mexico. It has 22% of the all national mangrove, and it even covered 2 states, which is Nayarit and Sinaloa. As you can imagine, Nayarit is the 3rd least populated state. It also, just 1% of the national population lives in that state. And the main economic activities in that state are agriculture, cattle ranching, fishery, and especially shrimp farming. And shrimp farming is really important for our economy because in the combination between the production in aquaculture, but also with the capture shrimps, the Mexican production is the Mexico is the ninth largest producer in the world of shrimps. And this area is in this context of aquaculture and of intensive aquaculture. This place, which is also a biosphere reserve, a Ramsar site, and also an area of importance to birds. And this place has a high geomorphological and biodiversity diversity. And it has really interesting dune fields that extend up to 15 kilometers inland. Also is the habitat of a lot of species and endemic species, and also really important for our conservation, such as the jaguar. The next one, please. But if you talk with a biologist about Marismas Nacionales, maybe thinking this, which is part of Marismas Nacionales, whether you see this mangrove area, which look really, really nice, but also there are, the next piece. This also happened in Marismas Nacionales. All these areas where mangroves were deforested and also desiccated to croplands and to put pasture, but also to establish aquaculture ponds. The next one, please. And the problem is that with these ecosystems, we lost some key ecosystem services, and especially because sorry, could you give another click? Thank you. And this is because the aquaculture ponds were not well planned. They just dig. It is as I said, it's sand, so the people just dig a pond and saw that the neighbors were really success with their shrimp production, so start to do it again. And there are also some incentives, economic incentives for shrimp farming. So they start to place these aquaculture ponds everywhere and don't think on how to dispose the wastewater. So they start to have some problems because, of course, if you are in the down watershed, you are receiving the wastewater from your neighborhood, from your neighbor that lives up to you. So the people start to have really polluted water, and the shrimp production start to drop. And moreover, they start to abandon crops, abandon ponds, and they start to have coastal erosion. Because what? Because these ecosystems are interconnected. The next one, please. But don't think that we don't have a solution and that this is just a talk about how bad we are. I think that we can do a lot of things. And in this paper from Broson, they say that if we manage to do all this restoration in forest, in grassland, but also in wetlands and other coastal ecosystems, we maybe can avoid and we can provide a lot of the mitigation that we need for the 2030 goals. So natural climate solution can provide 37% of cost-effective carbon mitigation needed. And also we can, if we restore, we can hold warming to below 2 Celsius degrees below. We can be below 2 Celsius degrees. And of course that climate mitigation is not just one way, there are different pathways. and they propose these different, like, I think that are 20, and of course they provide maybe some help to us to see which kind of things can we do and we can promote to manage and to tackle these global trends. Between the most important are conservation, restoration, and of course improve our management of coastal and in general of our ecosystems. The next one, please. If we talk about conservation, well, marine reserves are viable, are low-tech, are cost-effective adaptation strategies that could yield multiple co-benefits from local to global scales. And if we manage to do that, we can improve the outlook for the environment and also to the people. If we can remember the Convention on Biological Diversity and Sustainable Development, the goal 14, well, in that goal, coastal nations have committed to protect 10% of their waters by 2020. And in the case of Mexico, we are really, really happy because we managed to protect 22 or 25% of our seas. And that's the double of the goal. But however, one key determinant factor that we could pay attention on that is that the level of protection that we are giving to that areas. Fully protected areas that are really close to all extractive uses, to fisheries, etc., are we can say that are strongly protected areas. And they may provide the greatest conservation benefits, but it could also be really difficult to enforce these kind of protections in countries like Mexico or other developing countries where coastal communities depends on fisheries. But it's a fact that removing anthropogenic stressors can help in the recovery of the diversity and ecosystems and can build resilience and enable faster recovery, or at least increase our capacity to adapt to the effects of climate change. The next one, please. And restoration, which is my really, it's a really good option. Restoration of habitats can provide a lot of benefits, and also it's important to our adaptation to the effects of climate change, because these complex ecosystems, as we saw, with high abundance on diversity and species, well, that govern. Hello, sorry, I cannot see anything. Yeah, I'm back. Sorry. So we have some different case studies where restoration is being analyzed. For example, Waldheim in 2020 analyzed several, like 20 cases, and saw which ecosystems are being restored and which is the ecosystem value that this restoration could recover, and what is needed to improve and to push this restoration forward. For example, two contrast studies are one in Australia, where coastal wetlands and nearshore reefs are being degraded, were degraded, but also they have a really high economic value because of tourism and because of the fisheries, as we can imagine. And they identify that in this case, they need an integrated, as in all countries, an integrated catch management planning and a program where research, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting are coordinated with what? With the decision making. And of course, that large-scale wetland restoration, where low annual yield return crops land could turn to wetlands, may provide co-benefits such as ecosystem services. And of course, they already have some coral reef restoration efforts underway that are being very successful. In Mexico, for example, we have they analyzed the case of the Terminus Lagoon, which also have a lot of economic value for us, even for timber, for fisheries, and with water treatment. And what is needed in Terminus Lagoon? Well, the problem is that we have our oil companies in that area. So we need better zonation for the petroleum exploitation. And also we need regulation of forestry, replanting mangroves, and removal coastal cattle grazing on ban. And also ban maybe these shrimp ponds from the reserve. And these restoration efforts can enhance the fisheries productivity. So invest on that could be a really good idea, because also in this area we can, and also in Australia, as you know, we can preserve endangered species and also provide local green jobs. The next one, please. And this effort doesn't need to be really big to work. For example, we propose create a new beach landscape in really urbanized beaches to try to recover our tourism after, well, during and after this pandemic. And our proposal suggests that using incipient or embryo dunes, these really small, that could help to promote the social distancing, because no one wants to go up and down from these zones. So furthermore, these actions we also can help to protect local native plants. We have a lot of endemic plants in our zones, which sometimes are just loose and clean. And also we can provide and recover our natural dynamic while increasing the scenic beauty of our beaches. So maybe the visitors, even if they go to the sun and beach and just to lay in the beach, maybe they can enjoy our small dunes and also be forced, but in a green way, to respect the social distancing. And in this way, we maybe can trigger and we can go back to the beach, because our coastal communities really depend on tourism, such as a lot of communities around the world. The next one, please. So just for end, I would like to just highlight the decade of action that just started. So the United Nations decade on ecosystem restorations aims to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems on every continent and in every ocean. And I think, and they think, and this is the goal, and we can do it, I know it, it can help to end poverty, to combat climate change, and prevent a mass extinction of our species. But of course, that it will only succeed if everyone plays a part. And we are, as the slogan, the next one, please. The next one, please. As was the slogan of the Biodiversity Day, that I love it. I think that we all are part of the solution. And Waldheim, again, use this figure to show how, if we do it really good, and even if it's difficult, how ecosystems could change from now to 2030 if we manage to do the goals of to have the goals, to reach the goals of the restoration decade. So thank you very much. No, now we, sorry, we will have to Valeria Chavez from the UNAM.
Thanks. Well, hi, my name is Valeria. I work at the Engineering Institute in Mexico, and I will be talking to you about the use of green infrastructure for coastal risk mitigation. So as we all know, the coastal area is a very dynamic zone, because we have a lot of different factors and processes interacting in this area. from one side, we have like climate variables, sea level, marine processes, and all these the sediment fluxes that occur in that area. On the other hand, we have all the complex interactions between the ecosystems, as Deborah already explained some of them to us. Some physical characteristics as the geology and geomorphology, and also all the activities that humans conduct in that area. And this, in most of the coasts of the world, as also they were already explained to us, we have this phenomenon that is called coastal squeeze, that is affecting and putting the area in high risk and high vulnerability, but it has a low resistance to respond to all these processes that are occurring there. So what should we do to protect our interests? We usually we know the symptoms. For example, we know that we have a problem of coastal erosion, but we actually need to know what is the problem, what are the causes of that symptoms. For example, is it a change in the hydrodynamic patterns, more energetic waves, or do we have a lack of sediment supply? So we need to really make a very accurate diagnosis of what is the problem, the problem that we have, to actually try to design a solution. And also, it is very important for this to decide how to protect us, to decide and to analyze what do we have at risk. Do we have human lives? Do we have ecosystems and or infrastructure? So we know that we have two different approaches to manage the area. On one hand, we have traditional engineering that is really focused on the socioeconomic and political factors. And on the other, we have these environmental regulations that are focused on ecosystems health, resistance, and resilience. So we have been trying to work with both of them separately, but the trend now is to try to integrate both of them in the so-called ecosystem or nature-based solutions. These kind of alternatives have multifunctional goals to achieve both protect our interests from the human perspectives, the infrastructure and the human lives, but also try to protect and get use of the ecosystems services that they were already explained, that how we can, what services do the ecosystems provide. This concept is kind of new. We have a lot of, around the world, there have been a lot of different guidelines and policies established to try to incorporate these ecosystems to the solutions and the management of the coastal area, and not only the coastal area, also in the inland. But for example, we have plans that have been made in Europe, in the USA, in the European Union also, and they have been trying to delineate these kind of principles for the use and the integration of the ecosystem services to the management. And well, as already Deborah told us, we have these have been revised along the years, and we have already in 2021 have a new update for this kind of guidelines. So a practical concept that we can incorporate to try to design this kind of solutions is the coastal green infrastructure. This is defined as natural, semi-natural, or artificial constructions that contribute to the conservation, restoration of the biological diversity and the enhancement of the ecosystem services. So this infrastructure focuses on the connectivity of the ecosystems and the integration of them to the solution, to have multifunctionality purposes, and also it works in a multi-scale approach. So it includes the recognition that the design of the failures of the design. So it correlates the correlation of the possibility of no infrastructure is needed, or the retirement of the infrastructure. So a proposed classification for this kind of implementation can be made in these different 4 categories. They are organized according to the degree of naturalness of the alternative. In number one, we have nature reclamation, that is a term that includes habitat conservation and restoration. So these are the typical and already well-known alternatives that ecologists usually implement. On the second level, we have a category that is called engineered ecosystems, that is actually an ecosystem rehabilitation that is also a very well-known practice to preserve the ecosystems. An example for type 1 of nature reclamation could be a project of coastal dune restoration that can occur in beaches, and even that if the use of the beach is for tourist purposes. An example of number 2 of this category, of this classification, could be, for example, like in this picture, the construction of artificial channels to rehabilitate a mangrove. I will talk to you about one example where they actually implement this alternative. The number 3 of the classification is called ecologically enhanced engineering, and this is traditional hard or soft engineering, but is focused to imitate natural ecosystems. These need to take into account the connectivity of the ecosystems, to preserve or restore the fluxes of the system, but the alternatives are the traditional ones. For example, an artificial coral reef that is actually a breakwater, but designed with some characteristics of the elements with the porosity of the elements, to try to give the chance for the ecosystem, like the coral reefs, to attach to those structural pieces of the structure. Another example is, for example, the beach nourishments that are very well known as alternatives. But an example could be also a sand engine, where you place some amount of sediment in a specific area and leave it there for the natural processes to accommodate it along the beach. The next level, that would be the less natural, would be the engineering or relocation. This includes this aims to recover the system and move towards a more natural functional system. So an example would be the retirement of structure, of coastal protection structures like groins, for example, or also the retreat of touristic infrastructure. This also is already been done in some places to try to reduce the squeeze in the coastal area and to give some more space to the ecosystems to migrate and to have their natural processes, and increase the protection that they give to us. No? And on the other hand, we would have a hybrid alternative where more of one of these type of green infrastructure are included in one site to have a better result for the protection that we are looking for. So some important characteristics is that with more degree of naturalness, we will have also more uncertainty of the result of our implementation. We will need more time to act. So if we have an urgent case, that might not be the first option that we might look for. And we also need more space, to implement this kind of projects. And on the other hand, if we move for a less natural alternative with less degree of naturalness, we will have a higher cost usually. It is more expensive, of course, to remove and relocate structures than to have these natural projects, but well, that are some characteristics that has to be analyzed on each site to decide the more viable ones. So then an important clarification that I would like to make is that a green infrastructure is not a synonym of sub-solutions, because usually you can hear that you will have a green solution or a nature-based solution that is a sub-solution, and it's not necessarily the same. And on the other hand, not a great infrastructure is not necessarily a hard one. For example, the artificial coral reef, that would be a hard structural solution because you have there the structure that won't be moving with the wave action, for example, if it is well designed. But if the design consider all these natural processes and really contributes to the resilience of the beach, it can be considered as a green alternative. So here I have an example of a soft solution that was not very green. So this is Cancun. Also, Deborah mentioned this area in Mexico is one of our main touristic destinies. So it's like very important for our economy to preserve this area for tourists to come. So in 2007, we had the occurrence of the Hurricane Dean in this area. And in 2009, they built a beach nourishment that can be considered a soft solution. But as you can see, since 2010, the beach continually eroded, and we have a very bad design of the beach nourishment. It was not an adequate beach profile. It wasn't an adequate sediment of the one that they use for the beach nourishment. So it didn't really work. So it is very expensive. It didn't provide the service that they wanted. So it can't be considered a green infrastructure. Also, a very important aspect to consider is that the solutions should be designed to adapt along in time. Usually, we have a problem that we want to fix, and we might need to contain that problem. So we might need a solution, usually a hard one, to protect what we are needing to be protected. And then in time, we will have to monitor the progress of the area. No, here is when we can see that monitoring is very important, of course, to have good quality information for the design of the solutions, but also during the implementation of the projects to see and to have the opportunity to act and adapt the solution. So this in order to be moving to a more natural or to a more resilient system. So to have this flexibility to change the infrastructure that we implemented is very, very important for this kind of projects. So we have here a list of 8 different factors that can be considered key for a success of this kind of projects. As I was saying, the adequate diagnosis is the first one. So we really need to determine the causes of the problem to really try to design the alternative in order to attend to those causes. And we also need to keep in mind that we need to conserve the mass and energy flows in order to the fluxes, in order to do not introduce a new problem to the system by altering these fluxes. Then we have to consider that the solution that we implement, we will have to mimic the natural functions of the system. It is very important to use natural resources, both material and human, this in order to have a successful project, and also involve the local community in the project. Now, as we know, in any kind of project that is going to modify the system, usually the local people can have like problem with that. So in order to avoid this and have a successful project, you will have to involve them in all the parts of the process. We have to design and adapt the solutions according to the characteristics of each site. As maybe you know, the trend of copying the solutions that have already been designed for a specific site and just copying it and putting in a different place with different characteristics usually is a very, very bad idea. We have a lot of examples around the world where this has been done, and a great damage of the system is made. We also have to look for a resistant and resilient intervention, and as I was saying, to look always to adapt it along time to keep keeping it to be more efficient. So I will show you 4 examples that have been conducted around the world. Of course, they weren't designed with this classification that I show you, both in Caribbean and the south from Cancun. And they constructed the hotel in this mangrove forest. And it started to lose their integrity. So they decided to build these channels to improve the conditions of the forest. And it was achieved with this alternative. And well, they now can also have like more an attraction for the tourists with these ecotouristic activities along the channels to see the different species that have been coming back to this area with the increase of the integrity of the area. So another example could be the restoration of the dunes in this beach in Brazil. It's called Playa Casino. And this area was really urbanized, as you can see in this picture, because they allowed a lot of tourists and a lot of cars to park. This is a very good example where you see that this, of course, this is a continuous process that you have to carry over time. So it's not like you just make one action and forget about it and hope it works. So you have to keep monitoring to be able to make these kind of decisions and to move forward to a better health of all ecosystems, and costs are low. Also, as I mentioned, the diagnosis and the monitoring for in the area is a key element for the success of this kind of projects, because usually the alternative won't work if the key element that has to be solved isn't really attacked, and monitoring over time is really needed. So biodiverse regions have many opportunities and they are feasible to this kind of projects. But of course, we have the challenges to generate local technical capacities and search for the economic resources, and also have a very good communication with the decision makers in order to show them that the benefits of this kind of projects and to make them part of the solution. So to finish my presentation, I wanted to show you this video that lists some key elements to achieve sustainable coasts. In this specific example is for sandy coasts. So I will run it.
10 Commandments for sustainable, safe, wealthy and healthy sandy coasts facing global change. You shall make your coast a sustainable place to live. You shall consider interactions beyond the local scale so as not to harm other areas by your actions. You shall protect your coast against degradation using the latest advances in science and technology. You shall not mislead yourself and others. A coastal defence strategy with zero risk does not exist and never will. You shall monitor the performance of your defence schemes because coastal protection is a perpetual process. You shall assess your diagnosis and choose the best management and protection practices based You shall further our understanding of the relationships between natural resources and human welfare. You shall learn from unpredictable events in the past so as to prepare for
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you, Valeria. It's a pleasure to be here. So first, briefly, the contents. We'll see the importance of the assessment and management of risk, the visions of risk, the concept of risk, the assessment of environmental losses of mangrove due to coastal flooding, the application of the assessment methodology in a studied area in Mexico, in Isla del Carmen. And finally, we'll see some aspects of the mangrove restoration in this area. Why it's important to assess and manage risks? Well, there are two components of the integrated management of coastal zone for the sustainable development of the natural, socioeconomic, and cultural resources. So it's very important the incorporation of measures to prevent risk and minimize losses and damages. International interest into the risk assessment and management processes at the coastal zone is increasing due to the increase in the magnitude of coastal hazards, also due to the increase in the density of population settled in the coastal zone. So it's very important the definition of methodologies, tools, and techniques in order to understand the basic functioning of complex systems and thus minimize the risks and damages. Here we'll take the definition of risk given by the combination of probability and consequences, where the probability is defined as the probability of occurrence of a harm event, in this case, an inundation event, and the consequences are expressed in terms of damages of losses on the physical entities exposed to the threat. In this case, we'll focus on mangrove forest. Damage on mangroves are considered as environmental losses and classified as direct consequences due to the physical contact of the floodwaters, and also intangible due to the difficulty of their evaluation in monetary terms. The assessment methodology of environmental losses presented here is based on one published by Dasanayake and Omerasi in 2010, and it consists of two main steps. The first step is the identification of ecosystems and their environmental services, and the second step is the estimation of changes of these ecosystem services due to the impact of the different threats involved in a flood event. The main differences of this methodology are given by the consideration of additional threats that may affect to mangroves, and also the conservation status as an important parameter to take into account in the assessment. The result is also expressed in terms of changes in the ecosystem services of this ecosystem, in this case focused on mangrove forest. The total change of the environmental services is a function of the total degree of damage estimated by the different threats on the ecosystem. For mangrove, these are desalinity due to the changes in the inundation depth and flow velocity due to the duration of the inundation, and also due to the accumulation of sediments on roots or erosion. The studies indicate that the sensitivity to harm of the mangroves decreases for a healthier ecosystem. Therefore, the conservation status was considered as an important parameter to include in the methodology. A, B, C, and D are the weights in order to incorporate the relative importance of each factor on the degree of damage on the ecosystem. In Mexico, mangrove forests are surrounding all coasts. Here we can see in pink, and there are four main typologies of species: Avicennia germinans, Rhizophora mangor, Laguncularia racemosa, and also less dominant Conocarpus erectus. As an example of the application of the assessment methodology, we'll focus on this area in Isla del Carmen, in the Gulf of Mexico. Isla del Carmen is at high risk of coastal flooding due to the annual passage of tropical cyclones and also the impact of the climate change and the low topographic elevation of the coastal zone. So following the methodology, the first step is the identification of the ecosystem and the environmental services on Isla del Carmen based on land use data. In light green, we can see the large extension of mangrove, almost or around 68% of the ecosystem are mangroves. There are three principal typologies of species: black mangrove or Avicennia germinans, red mangrove or Rhizophora mangor, or white mangrove as we call also Laguncularia racemosa species. We also know some characteristics of this mangrove. In dark green, we can see the dominant extension of Rhizophora mangor, and followed by the dominancy of Laguncularia racemosa and also the Avicennia germinans species. These are of a higher height, 6 to 8 meter height, and with a good state of conservation. In light green, it's shown the extension of Avicennia germinans species with a height 4 to 6 meters height and also a good state of conservation. And in yellow and red, we see a low cover of mangrove patches with a lower height, but with a fair and poor state of conservation. After that, we have to identify the environmental services on Isla del Carmen. For example, the mangrove forests provide coastal protection, prevention of floods, but we have to select one for the analysis. In this case, we select coastal protection services for the analysis. The second step is the estimation of the changes on this environmental service in Isla del Carmen, and we evaluate the degree of damage by the different threats. First, the influence of the salinity on mangrove species. Mangrove species have an optimal salinity range for growth and survival. Some species has a very wide salinity tolerance. Others tolerate a salinity less than 40 parts per thousand, but there are no any species that can reach salinities higher than 90 parts per thousand. Also, some species develop a mechanism to resist high salinities. For example, Avicennia germinas and Aluncularia racemosa species excrete the excess of salt through the glands in their leaves. On the other hand, Rhizophora mangrove prevents salt penetrates inside, but it was observed the maximum development of this species is given in salinities less than 9 parts per thousand. Other species has less ability to develop adaptation to salt contents. Other authors classify the species into 6 groups attending to this salt resistance. For example, group 1 to group 0 increases salinity tolerance. In group 1 include the species that occur in conditions closer to the limiting salinity factor of this species. In contrast, in group 0, we have the species that has are indifferent to salinity and thus has a very large amplitude. These authors relate the loss of functionality of the species for values higher than seawater salinity with the typologies of the species, the biological form, and also with the ability or not to develop aerial roots as an adaptation mechanism. So the species, the aerial roots that some species can develop enable plants to breathe through the lenticel on their roots. 4 main typologies are distinguished. The first, prop roots in Rhizophora mangrove, pneumatophores in the species Avicennia germinas and Aluncularia racemosa, others niche roots or buttress roots. Therefore, attending to this criteria, the degree of damage to assess the salinity factor depends on the ecological group of the species and also the ability or not to develop this adaptation to high salt level. Attending to this criterion in Isla del Carmen, we have in dark green the predominance of Rhizophora mangrove. So we assign a value of 0.5 in loss of functionality due to this factor. In the rest, the degree of damage is 0, given the dominance of Avicennia germinans species. The inundation depth and velocity of the flow velocity are also important threats to be considered on mangrove ecosystems. The impact of the inundation depth is also related to the ability of the mangrove species to develop or not aerial roots. The species will eventually die if they don't have any alternative response to the loss of oxygen due to the inundation depth. The height of the aerial roots usually indicates the maximum inundation depth. According to the typology of the aerial roots, they can be ordered from greater to lesser resistant to inundation depth. First, prop roots, following pneumatophores, knee roots, and finally buttress roots. These criteria are included in the tension and stress parameters defined by these authors, which depend on the height of the roots, the stem diameter, and also the flow parameters, inundation depth, and flow velocity. The probability of damage is a function of these parameters. In Isla del Carmen, we use these values to calculate the tension and stress parameter and estimate a probability of damage due to the inundation depth and flow velocity threats. Regarding the impact of the duration of the inundation, the impact of this threat is also related to the ability of the mangrove species to develop aerial roots as adaptation mechanism under low oxygen levels. And also it depends on the typology of the aerial roots from lesser to greater affectation. And here we have the values allocated in Isla del Carmen, depending on the topology of the area roots of the dominant mangrove patches. Finally, the affectation due to the accumulation of sediment on roots or erosion. Regarding this, the accumulation of sediment, the height of the roots and the sediment size are important parameters to consider. Hence, the lenticel through which the plant's breeze can be blocked. Also, the area roots increase the anchoring capacity in case of erosion. Therefore, species with this adaptive capacity are considered to be more resilient to the threats of sediment accumulation or erosion. A value of 0 or 1 is given depending on the lack or presence of these characteristics of the species. In Isla del Carmen, a valuation of 0 was allocated to the different classes of species according to this criteria. And also, as commented before, several studies indicate that mangrove with a good state of health are less sensitive to damage when exposed to an external hazard, and also have a better adaptive capacity to respond effectively to changes. So this factor is included with an inverse relationship with the degree of damage, and this valuation depending on a good, fair, or a poor state of conservation. Therefore, in Isla del Carmen, these values are allocated to the different classes of mangroves. Finally, weights are A, B, C, and D integrate the relative importance of threats on the total degree of damage on the ecosystem. For example, some species with the ability to develop pneumatophores are more limited on their survival by the inundation depth and the duration of the inundation. So this is included as a higher value of the factor affecting the inundation depth. The values are allocated to the different classes of mangrove in Isla del Carmen depending on the predominant species. And here is the distribution of the total degree of damage in Isla del Carmen following a cell-based analysis in a microspatial scale. But how do we express the degree of damage in terms of the change of the environmental services, as we selected the environmental service of coastal protection for analysis? So if we have that data, we can do something similar to who made these authors, who relate the coastal protection services of a mangrove forest of Rhizophora species with the survival rate, which is the inverse of the probability of damage in terms of the decrease of the inundation depth in the protected area of mangroves. So this highlights the importance of the monitoring system to collect data at local scale, which are essential to improve the quality of the studies. Therefore, based on the results of the assessment methodology, we can identify high areas at high risk of inundation and high degree of damage. And here, restoration or rehabilitation action can be carried out in order to improve the state of conservation of these ecosystems. This action would reduce the vulnerability of them, decreasing their sensitivity to the threat of hazard, and also increasing their adaptive capacity to changes. But it's important to note that landward migration is a coastal adaptation measure adopted by mangrove and other tidal forests across coastal, lowland, under sea level rise and other coastal hazards, and it's already greatly impeded by the increased urban development along many coastlines. Here in Isla del Carmen, we have the same problematic. We can see the urban area in 1981, and here the expansion of this area in 2020. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, everyone. I want to thank Exceed for this opportunity and having me. And today I would like to talk about planning the cost for the near future. But basically, I want to present the results of a project in Colombia that we are developing in partnership with some collaborators there in Colombia. This is my team. We are working in different fields of knowledge related with the climate change and the coastal system. But also we are addressing issues related with conservation of coastal ecosystems, including mangroves and shorebirds. So I want also to mention the active participation of the Black community of Punta Soldado Island. They are supporting us in the field, and also with knowledge and with traditional knowledge of the coast. So for today, I want to discuss start with our motivation that basically addresses 3 specific topics: coastal areas, developing countries, and climate change. So we will talk a little bit about these 3 aspects and how they in different scales can work together. So next, I will talk about what we are doing, especially how we are addressing coastal floods and coastal erosion, and what are the things that, and finally, the things that we need to improve in our project, and what are the next steps in this process. So to start, I want to bring you back in time to 2015, when the Paris Agreement was signed by 196 countries. In my opinion, it opened the door to a new transition into a greener and more climate-adapted world. And it was a milestone for the climate negotiations that started maybe 25 years back. So in this particular event, international organization, basically 3 important aspects: the financial, the technical, and the building capacity of mitigation and adaptation. So for today, I want to talk more about adaptation. So there is an important result of this conference, and it is the Paris Agreement claimed the need to increase adaptation capacity in developing countries, especially in more vulnerable developing countries, where climate impacts will be more severe. So as an example of one of these countries, today I will talk about Colombia, that is my home country. So Colombia is located in the northern part of South America, next to Central America, and due to this location, we have the opportunity, we have this and the benefit of to have coast on the Caribbean and also on the Pacific Ocean. So it is huge opportunity, but at the same time, it's a tremendous challenge because we need to understand better how these different codes work and what are the challenges that we have. So related with adaptation, Colombia has already started moving towards a more resilient future. At a national scale, the country already has the National Climate Adaptation Plan, and more recently, the country issued the climate change law. Thanks to this law, the departments in Colombia, a department is like a state or like this political division that we have in Colombia. These departments have to issue, have to work to issue climate change management plans. So in these plans, basically, in turn for the coastal area, is explicit that the government has to do projects related with coastal protection of communities, protection of ecosystems, and protection of the natural assets like ecosystems, or also the beaches or mangroves, mudflats. So far everything is working well. Of course, there are some departments with more advanced than other locations, but when we zoom in into the local scale, these small places in Colombia, these places are where the action, the real adaptation occurred. We have a lot of complications, a lot of barriers there. So one of the most important issues is that for the Pacific coast, we have very small, remote, and socioeconomical vulnerable communities. So you can imagine that if we have this kind of communities, the adaptation capacity is not really strong. So I want to show you today some pictures of the communities that we have on the Pacific coast. Of course, we have bigger cities, bigger towns than this town, but there are many settlements with these features. So in general terms, the economy in this area is based on fishing, and also women in this area work in the mangroves, into the forest mangroves. So these challenges that we have to work in these places, in broadly speaking, we can divide it into major challenges. The first one is researchers need to develop local and accurate scientific knowledge. So in general terms, in literature, we can find a lot of publications, we can find a lot of information about how the coastal system works. But when we want to develop a project in a particular place, in one of these communities, we find that there are no data, there are no local and accurate information to develop projects. It means no information to make decisions. So this is the first challenge, and for this case, the participation of academia, it's really important. The second challenge is the efficient cross-sector collaboration, and this collaboration is among government, private sector, communities, climate champions, etc. So we need to work together to advocate for an actual transformation in the society, and we will have a more climate adapted coastal areas. So how we are addressing this problem in Colombia, and like our group is addressing this problem. So first of all, we are working with a framework of coastal plan adaptation plan. So in the literature is known as climate smart planning, but there are different names for the same plans, and also there are many options. There are many plans that you can find. So some plans are more ecosystems oriented or more communities oriented. So this plan in general is very wide in terms of the focus, and it can be understood or developed in 5 main steps. So the first one is to explore the hazards. So for our, like broadly speaking, we have interest in sea level rise, storm waves, ocean currents, but also we can include hazards associated with river flooding, precipitation, etc. So the next step is develop the vulnerability and risk assessment. So include this step to evaluate the assets. What are the assets that we have in the community? So ecosystems, infrastructure, and the land or the mainland. Because as you will see in some figures later, we can these communities, they are located next to mangrove forest, but these mangrove forests are completely flooded. So it's not possible to develop a community within the mangrove forest. So it is really important to identify this land. Where is this pieces, small pieces of land where community are living and where they have this flexibility to move in case of a climate event like a storm or coastline and retreat. So understanding these first 2 factors, we can move to identify the potential solutions. So here we have basically 2 solutions. Adaptation, that it means do something, and planned relocation. That is, okay, it's not possible to do something in the place, we will have to move. But we need to plan this relocation. It's not only wait for this climate displacement, because we will create more problems in all places, like in the main cities. So in the 4th step, we have the plan that basically is the creation of the projects, and it's really important for this step to work together with policymakers, but also with the organizations that have the financial capacity to develop these projects. So it can be the government, but also it can be the international organizations. And finally, the take action process that includes monitoring, to have open data, and to evaluate this effectiveness of the process. So on the other hand, we have that, as I mentioned before, that is really, really important, this collaboration with other institutions. So we can understand this collaboration as a governance process, this climate governance process. So here we have different steps also for this collaboration. We start with understanding the social needs, and these social needs are the challenges that the communities, NGOs, government, and private sector have. So we need a strong collaboration between these communities and the universities to have a research oriented to solve these problems. Why? Because we are in a crisis. We don't have enough time to develop all the knowledge that we have. So we need to be really smart, developing our research and trying to help the problems that society have in this particular place. So after having good results, good science, good information, we will want to move to have better environmental policies. So we need basically to match the language of scientists and the language of policymakers and government. So here we identify that it's really, really important to have a translator. It's an organization, it's a person who can help to articulate, to join these two different words. So in this case, we identify that NGO or international organizations or research centers work really, really well doing this job. And finally, again, when we have this process almost complete, we can move to take action again. So part of in my organization, in my current organization, in Coastal Solutions Fellowship Program, we are working as synergizers. Basically, we are trying to gather all these organizations, all these stakeholders on the table together and work together, but we are not explicitly responsible of the development on these projects. So we want really deep collaboration and to have a sustainable project. Basically, that we expect many initiatives for the future that can run with enough momentum. So I want to show where we are applying this concept that I mentioned before. We are working in Punta Soldado Island. It is an island close to Buenaventura. It is the main city on the Colombian Pacific coast. This island is approximately 5 meters, 5 kilometers long, with small south of the island. for different reasons and storm waves. So as you can see, this is part of the infrastructure that this community had in the past, but now basically this structure is facing the waves, the wave attacks. Also, we decided to work there because of the rapidly erosion that the community was facing there. Basically, the coastline retreated 600 meters in 4 decades. So, how we are addressing the problem? So we started identifying the extreme sea levels in the island. So then we move to understand the conditions in the future, or trying to understand how fast will be the sea level rising in the future. So we are using different sources of information, from in situ data, that is the recording of the tides in Buenaventura, and also projections from the from Carson and collaborators. So we are expecting at the end of the century Maryland. Of course, there are a lot of variability in this prediction and a lot of uncertainty. So we are basically combining these sources of information and trying to understand how coastal flooding, how the frequency and the magnitude of coastal flooding is changing along the time. So I have an example here. We have the limit, the threshold for our extreme events is 2.5 meters. So this value is roughly associated with a return period of less than 1 year. So this is the current situation right now. So imagine that we will have these 50 centimeters that I told you. The same event, the same extreme event, we will have a frequency associated to this value that is approximately 1 week. So we are saying basically that this extreme event that we have once a year, we will have this event once a week. That this is really, really concerning, because in this projection, I have only one example, but it's the same with these values that are more frequent. So we will have an increase in the frequency of these events for the future. So basically, we can no way to plan our costs. We can no way for 50 years or 80 years. We need to start now. We need to mobilize all these organizations to act now. So there are very important events here, the highest events in the record. They are associated with El Nino. So due to this reason, we decided to evaluate how these extreme events are related with El Nino. So in this figure, you can see the number of extreme events per month. So you see that for this part of the year, we have more extreme events. And you will see that under normal conditions, we have even more events than during El Nino. But there is something particular, that when we have El Nino conditions, we have extreme events in August. That is not common under normal conditions. But also, as we saw in the last picture, these strongest events of sea level rise are associated with El Nino. So this is really, really important to know, because the frequency of El Nino events are roughly between 6 and 8 years. So for the future, many authors claim that we will have more and more strong El Nino events. So we will see later in this presentation what are the consequences of these strong sea level events. So also, we try to identify if El Nino has a strong connection with storm waves. What I found for Buenaventura was that during El Nino, the magnitude of the waves is not significantly bigger than under normal conditions, but we have important change in the direction of the waves. So around 20 degrees under these different two conditions, normal and El Nino. So with these changes, we can expect a stronger current, near short currents. So we will see part of the evidence about this in the next figure. So for the island, as I told you before, we have this erosion process really active in the island. So you can see here a timeline of this process starting from 1986. We have information from 2020. So there is something really important in this process of coastal erosion. That is, when we compared during this timeline, when we compare the rates of erosion for this area in particular, the mean between the first image and the last one is around it's around 12 centimeters per month. This is the rate of erosion. But when we check information from the event of El Nino in the 97 to 98, we found that this rate is roughly 4 meters per month. So it's really strong, is several order of magnitudes than the normal rate. We expect for the future more that we will have these rates associated with these rates associated with mix of no. To finish, with the island to continue working basically to fill in every step in this coastal adaptation plan. So for this year in particular, we want to develop a pilot nature-based adaptation measurement that is wood barriers, and we want to include to have a more active participation of the community, basically because we can provide more socioeconomical benefits for the community. Also, they will be involved in community-based conservation and climate adaptation. And at the same time, we are contributing with these social problems that they are facing there. So some thoughts that we have in this project, it was a poor engagement of the environmental and decision-making institutions of the city. Even when I show this governance framework, we are working really extremely well between academic organizations, but we need to improve this connection and these conversations with the government. So also we are applying and we are participating in different funding programs. So, but we need to find a long-term funding to support young researchers and to avoid fragmentation of the team. And also these field activities were interrupted by COVID-19 and right now by national scale protests in Colombia. So we expect to continue working for the future, and we really appreciate all the contribution that you can provide us and conversation that we can have about this issue. So thank you for your attention, and I am open for all your questions, and you can reach me through my email or through my Twitter. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Itsasoderi Zofanam, and I'm going to introduce to you the work with the title Adapting to What? Coastal Hazards in a Warming Planet. In this presentation, we are going to talk about the importance of climate scenarios in coastal adaptation projects, and we are going to propose global and coastal wave climate frameworks for the near and far future. We are focusing on wave climate because it's the principal driver of coastal processes. It can induce coastal risk and is an important factor in coastal ecosystems, for example, in ecosystem connectivity, coastal squeeze, and water quality. When we are planning climate change adaptation on coastal areas, we aim to reduce coastal risk. Coastal risk is a function of coastal hazards and coastal exposure. Coastal hazards can be induced by climate-related drivers such as waves, winds, hurricanes, among others. And climate change and climate variability can induce variations on these coastal hazards. So, climate change and variability increase coastal hazards, and if we have the same coastal exposure, we will have an increase also in coastal risk. This is why we take actions and we propose adaptation projects with the aim to reduce the coastal exposure to reduce coastal risk. And this is why it is fundamental to analyze how climate change and climate variability impacts coastal hazards. Because if not, we can fall in maladaptation and aggravating more than solving the problem. So in this presentation, we are going to talk of how climate change and variability impacts the wave climate that is a climate-related driver of coastal hazards. Climate change and natural variability drive the global temperature of the planet, and this change in temperature leads to different gradients in pressure and modifies the atmospheric circulations and the climate system. Climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions, while natural variability is caused by natural oscillatory climate patterns. For example, ENSO, SAM, or PDO. They are anomalies in pressure system impacting the global, regional, and local climate. When we are planning climate change adaptations, we should think about changing climate. On the top of this graphic, we can see the projected scenarios proposed by the IPCC. Until 2040, the projected scenarios are not so different from the historical data, but from this year, we can see differences in the climate projections and the historical data. So if we are going to analyze the near future, we can use historical data, but if we are going to analyze the mid-future and far future, we need to use projected data. So let's talk about the global wave climate framework for the near future. We classified the wave climate into types. We used ERA5 analysis dataset for the last 40 years, and we used monthly average of wave power and mean wave direction. We compute the classification using a dynamic clustering technique, and the classification identifies a global set of major wave climates that have the same spatial temporal patterns as the planetary wave systems. Here we can see the results. We are seeing the trade winds that induced the tropical wave climate and the polar winds that induce the polar wave climate. Here are the extratropical winds and wave climates, and in summer we have the monsoon winds and the monsoon wave climates, and during the winter we have the one pole winds and the one pole wave climates. Again, the same with the southerlies, we have the subpolar and subtropical winds and wave climates. The advantages of this classification is that we have the classification in time, and that makes possible to analyze natural variability and signals of global warming. So let's do that. We are going to analyze for the historical data the natural variability and global warming. And to do that, we extract the wave climate characteristics of each wave climate type. With the time series of the wave power, we compute composite anomalies for the periods of ENSO and PDO coupled, and ENSO and SAM coupled. The global warming signal, to detect the global warming signal, we analyze the trends in wave power and sea surface temperature. The latter is a key indicator of global warming, so we can identify if there is a relationship between the wave power and temperature of the oceans. This table shows the results for the natural variability and the global warming that we are going to summarize in these graphics. For the subtropical and subpolar wave climates of the North Atlantic and North Pacific, we have a strong natural variability signal, and also for the extratropical wave climate of the Southern Ocean. We have detected a strong signal of global warming in the Indian Ocean for the subtropical, extratropical, and warm pole wave climates. Also, we have identified evidence of global warming in the tropical Pacific and tropical Atlantic. But let's focus on the coast, on the coastal areas. These maps show coastal areas affected by prevailing wave climates with global warming signal evidence. We have a global warming signal evidence in the tropical wave climate of the Atlantic and the Pacific, and in the Indian Ocean for the subtropical, warm and extratropical wave climate types. Signals of natural variability were detected in the North Atlantic for the extratropical and subtropical wave climate types, and on the coast of Latin America for the subtropical wave climate types. Again, natural variability signals were detected induced by ENSO, SAM, and PDO for the Indian Ocean for all the wave climate types, the subtropical, the warm and the extratropical, and as well for the North Pacific and South Pacific on those coasts affected by extratropical wave climate type. So we have talked about the near future. Let's talk about the far future. For the far future, we have proposed the same wave climate framework, but in this case, we are using wave climate projections for the RCP H5 scenario. We applied the same method of dynamic clustering technique as we have explained before for the present conditions. And the classification was repeated for the projected scenario using the previously obtained centroids from present day conditions rather than generating new ones. So we can analyze here the difference in wave power. On the left, we have the total net difference between the present conditions and projected scenario. And on these panels, we can see the difference associated to each wave climate type. We have here the easterlies, the westerlies, and the southerlies. We saw a decrease in wave power in the tropical climates and an increment in the polar and subpolar wave climate types. In the westerlies, we can observe that we have an increment in wave power in the high latitudes of both hemispheres, and we have a decrease in wave power in the mid latitudes. This is motivated by a poleward displacement and intensification of the extratropical circulation. These differences are for the boreal winter, and for the boreal summer, we have a reduction in the monsoon wave climate and an increase in wave power of the subtropical wave climates, specifically in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In the Caribbean Sea, we have an intensification in the tropical wave climate that is produced because the Caribbean Sea is getting warmer than the Atlantic basin. That creates a stronger gradient in pressure and intensifies the local winds. So again, let's focus on the coastal wave climate. This time we are proposing transitional wave climate regions that are coasts that will be effective for an increment in frequency of the wave climate types. In general, the southerlies and the easterlies will be more prevailing in the next century. So to conclude, the main conclusions are: the more accurate are climate scenarios and their impacts on coastal hazards, the more successful will be climate change adaptation. To better identify the impacts of climate change and variability on wave climate, we have proposed a framework that consisted of classifying the wave climate into types. The wave climate types are induced by the variability of the planetary wind and pressure systems. Therefore, any fluctuation in the atmospheric circulation is easier to detect and quantify on wave climate. We have identified those coasts affected by natural variability, global warming signals, and projected change in the frequency of wave climate types. This diagnosis of global costs can produce an anticipatory rather than reactive response to wave climate impacts in the future. And it can help to calibrate efforts and channel the financial instruments of national governments by identifying regions where adaptation, further monitoring, research, and technical analysis are needed. Provide guidance on the set of needs based on wave climate impact, build the capacity of industry, the community organizations and governments, and build partnerships with those countries with a similar wave climate conditions. This presentation is based on two papers. The first one is published, has been published, and the second one is under preparation. So thank you so much for your attention, and I will be happy to respond to any question you have. Send me an email, and have a good day.